What's going on, YouTube? Today we are going to be doing the front wheel bearings on the AE86 school car. A lot of people do this wrong, which is not their fault. Like the Haynes manual, a lot of those do-it-yourself manuals actually show you to do this the wrong way. So we're going to go ahead and show you the right way to do it on these old Toyotas. Since we need to take the calipers off anyway, I've got a new pair of pads. So we're going to go ahead and put some new brake pads in there, get the front brake calipers finished on the car with the new wheel bearings. That's gonna be the last thing that we need to do before we can drop the chassis back on the ground. All right, now the wheel bearings on these cars really aren't that big of a deal. They're pretty easy to do. It's a bit of a chore, but don't get scared of them. They're really not that bad. Our bearing did not come off easily. Now, sometimes they can get a little bit rougher if the bearing has been seized and therefore the inner race is stuck to the spindle. But even then, there's tricks to getting it off. So don't panic. It's a relatively easier job to do. So obviously we're gonna start with getting the car up, getting it secured, and then we'll go ahead and get the caliper off. You're gonna take a screwdriver here and just really gently tap, and then go to the opposite side, or like 1/3. Okay, and you'll pull this lip out, and then once you have the lip out that you can get the screwdriver, just quite literally just start prying on it. I like to basically put it in there and then twist the screwdriver. Roll the hub, twist the screwdriver. All right. First is to get the cotter pin out of here so we can get the cover off and the nut loose, and then we'll extract the hub off it. Okay, once you take the cotter pin and the little lock nut off, it's a 22 millimeter. Should not be tight. There's going to be a retainer. It's basically a really thick washer, but it's got a groove in it. Now, if yours has some wear in it, you need to replace it. They're still available through Dorman, so most of your main part stores can still get it. It's just going to be a special order. So make sure you get a pair of retainers too before you go ahead and do these. They look something like that. Now there's essentially nothing keeping the wheel on, so you can usually, if you're lucky, just like I did, just pull them off. If it's a little bit more stubborn than that, you might need to use a little bit more force, especially if they've blown out and seized on you. I got really lucky since it's fresh, and both bearings came completely off. What'll happen a lot of times is the inner bearing will stick. So we're just gonna wipe it clean. All right, once you get the spindle nice and cleaned up, it's a good idea to just check all your threads, make sure your threads are good, check the mating surfaces on the bearing, make sure that there's no scoring or pitting or damage to where the bearing's gonna sit. They're gonna give you issues. Check the whole spindle for any kind of discoloration, any kind of physical damage, any kind of crack that you might be able to see, because that's your indicator that your spindles, which most of these now are old, so you know, you want to make sure that they're in good shape. That's a perfect chance to do this. So in this case, everything looks good, cleaned up. It's ready for the hub. So let's get onto the hub and we'll put the new bearings in it. Trick to it is there's a slot here and a slot there that you want to clean off. Feel that slot. You'll be able to get to the actual race. So they'll be opposite each other. So there we go. Sounds like we got it. Felt like we got it. See? There you go. Okay, And with it a little cleaned up, you can see the slots that I was telling you about. That's what I was using to hammer that race out. Okay, now for the other side, we're gonna do the exact same thing. Notice I put it up on a couple pieces of wood here just to elevate it so we have more room to get the bearing out. Okay, I think that's just the bearing. Yeah, so it's just the bearing and the seal. We still need to get that inner race out. All right, there we are. Now it's key to notice the direction. And then this inner race is what's gonna sit flush to your spindle. That's what it can get seized. So sometimes this bearing will be all shot, all destroyed, and then you get to cut very delicately through this. All right, and for this, we are gonna be using Master Pro high temp disc brake wheel bearing grease, just a generic high temp wheel bearing grease. And we're gonna be using these bearings from SKF, from Napa. You usually have them readily available. So I went ahead and used SKF parts. Outer bearing is part number BR1. Inner bearing, which is a larger one, BR8. And the hub seal is a part number 16151, all made by SKF. Napa carries these, so you can go to any Napa, and they may or may not have the wheel bearings in stock, but they can get all of them usually within a day or two. So this is the part number to get the axle retainer nuts through Dorman. As you can see, I've got a box here. I've had these for years, so one box will do you plenty. Here I am packing the new bearings full of wheel bearing grease. If you're not familiar with packing bearings, please look up a video on YouTube. I'm sure there's plenty out there from good mechanics that'll show you how to do it. For reference, I've gone ahead and drawn a little diagram. Here's your spindle. The bearing will go on the spindle, pointing in. The race will go in the hub, pointing out. Same is true for the inner bearing. The race will go in the hub, pointing out. The bearing will go in the race, pointing in. And then you have your nut, your lock nut, and your cotter pin. Now we're going to take the race, and the fatter end goes inside. Remember, that bearing's supposed to point in towards the middle of the hub. So you can take the last race from tip to tip and use that to tap in the new one. And as soon as you get it sitting flush all the way around, you're good. And we'll go ahead and flip to the other side. And again, remember the bearing's supposed to point in. So the fatter part should be the first to drop in. And just like the outer, we're gonna use the old race to get this squared away. Once you get it just before it gets seated, you're gonna have the outer one sticking a little bit, so just be careful of that. If you flip it upside down, you'll get a little bit more movement out of it. Okay. Now that we do have the inner race on the back side pressed in there, I'm gonna go ahead and drop our bearing in there. Just gonna give it a little more grease. I'm gonna grease up the seal. Now be careful when you take it apart, you don't want to damage these. And the seal comes in with the exposed side facing in. So, like that. You can almost just push it in by hand, and I like to just light taps. You're just getting it flush. Don't beat on it. You're literally just let it get flush. Drop in the inner bearing. And now this is ready to slide back on the spindle. All right, back outside, we're gonna use more of that red wheel bearing grease on that spindle. All right, we're gonna take that retainer washer, also lubricate both sides. Let's put it on and put some more on the outside. Take your nut, get it on there hand tight. Here's where the repair manuals are going to let you down. They're going to tell you to torque this to 22 foot-pounds, which is not wrong. That is actually the torque spec to seat the bearings. However, you don't keep it torqued down. So, yes, it's true. You want to use a torque wrench, and we want to dial this in here to 22 foot-pounds. Okay, so we're dialed into 22 foot-pounds. Do you want to go ahead and tighten this? Notice it's still spinning well. Go ahead and keep tightening. Notice it's getting a little harder to spin, but still able to. Okay, so there's 22 foot-pounds. Now, notice that I can spin this, but this is much heavier. The problem with that is if we keep this much pressure, we will burn the bearings up. They will just constantly just be smashed together. Higher pressure, higher friction, higher temperatures. Once you get to 22 foot-pounds, back it off. Let's give her some rotations. Snug it back up again. There's 22 foot-pounds again. See, it's very tight, very snug. And again, we're gonna back off. We wanna get that as tight as we can with the fingers. This is my style. And then from here, add a quarter turn. And that is going to be a perfectly torqued wheel for an AE86. Now, what other people like to do is spin the rotor and torque it until it gets to a certain friction, but that's something you got to feel out. Torque it to 22 foot-pounds, rotate it as you back it off, rotate it, torque it to 22 foot-pounds again, back it off, hand tight, and you want to do just under a quarter turn, and then go ahead and put your lock nut on. And that is not something that a manual will show you. The manual will show you it wrong, and you're gonna burn up the bearings. This way you're actually gonna have less than 22 foot-pounds. You're just gonna use up to 22 foot-pounds to seat the bearings a couple times. Use less, you're probably somewhere in the 12 to 18, probably not even 18, you're probably 12 to 15, but that's my way of doing it. Once you've got your crown nut back on there, we can go ahead and install a cotter pin. Let's tuck an eye out. Now that we got the cotter pin back in, we can take our dust shield. Put that back on. Alright, so you put your dust cover back in here, and again, just very gently, just gonna push on the flange all the way around until it is flush with the hub. And that is the appropriate way to do a wheel bearing on an AE86. Let's go ahead and put this caliper back together. Of course, you know we're doing some grease on the pads. So now I just gotta do the other side, and I guess we'll see how quick I can do it. So in the case of the driver bearing, our bearing did not come off easily. And if we do this motion, you can tell it's actually oblong. It's not perfectly round anymore. So this bearing is no good, which is a good thing we're changing it. But we got to get it off, right, without damaging it. You can use a puller, like a 2-arm puller, if you can get one that fits in here. Get the bearing off sometimes. You don't want to do too much damage here, but you can do a puller. Sometimes you can just use like a screwdriver and pry it off, but that doesn't look like that's gonna be something that we can do today, where we might have to grind that inner race down so we can break it, and then we can extract it that way without damaging the spindle. So that's worst case scenario, right? So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna take this wet rag, kind of wrap it around the spindle there away from the bearing that we're trying to get off. And then we're gonna concentrate the heat with this MAP gas torch. We're going to concentrate it on the bearing only. Make sure you move it around, but you want to keep it on the bearing. And the idea is we want the bearing to get hot faster than the spindle so it expands. So I'm going to keep using this rag. So unfortunately, heat didn't work either. This one's actually really on there. So this is absolutely worst case scenario. If you run into this, we're gonna have to cut it off. So make sure you're using some eye protection first and foremost. And then remember, you're not cutting through the bearing. You're cutting almost through the bearing, because you don't ever want to actually touch the spindle. Once you touch the spindle, you've ruined the spindle. So you've got one shot at this. So don't go through the bearing, just cut the bearing away, and then we're gonna try to crack it open with the hammer and chisel. Here we go. Now that we've gone through most of the way, get it on there nice and tight, and give her a spin. And she said, and as you can see, I did nick it once there, but the spindle itself is completely fine. And that's how you cut them off. It's a pain, but just take it easy. Don't panic. Don't get impatient. Just trim a little away, trim a little away, trim a little away, and then get like a pair of either a pipe wrench or a pair of channel locks, or like a big pair of channel locks or a big crescent wrench or something that you can clamp down on that flat side and start to rotate it. As soon as you can start to spin it, it's gravy, baby. It's almost off. Okay, so we're gonna take our inner bearing, which is the larger of the two, put that in there. And then we're gonna take our hub seal so that the metal flange is facing upwards. And I like to take a 2x4 or something like that so we get even pressure on it. So it's flush. I mean, maybe here. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and then we got a flush surface on there. And that seal's in good shape, and the bearing's in there. Now we'll go ahead and roll it over. And the inner bearing that we had packed and lubricated goes here. And then we'll take this whole assembly and slide it in on the spindle. Okay, so we're gonna take our inner bearing, which is the larger of the two, put that in there. And then we're gonna take our hub seal so that the metal flange is facing upwards. And I like to take a 2x4 or something like that so we get even pressure on it. So it's flush. I mean, maybe here. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and then we got a flush surface. And that seal's in good shape, and the bearing's in there. Now we'll go ahead and roll it over. And the inner bearing that we head packed, lubricated goes here. And then we'll take this whole assembly and slide it in on the spindle. Torque it again. Okay, it's 22 foot-pounds. Again, as you can see, we can rotate it, but it's under a lot of pressure. We don't want that. So we're gonna take it back off. And I like to take the nut back completely off. And get it as tight as you can with just your fingertips, right? And then do an honest, like, quarter turn, not even a quarter turn. So we're gonna come up from here to here, all right? That's a quarter. And you'll feel it when it gets tight. So I was more than an eighth, but not quite a quarter, almost a quarter. All right, now it's tight, it's secure. There's absolutely no play in the bearing. That's what you want. You don't necessarily want pressure on it. You just don't want any like loose play. And then go ahead and put our retainer ring on. And there she is, on all fours again. Since we have to take the calipers off, I've got a new set of brake pads. What's going on, YouTube? I may or not,